"I just want to check my balance," the 90-year-old woman whispered as she stepped forward, leaning on her wooden cane. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind that carried years of survival, dignity, and quiet strength. The millionaire behind the counter stared at her with a smirk he didn't bother to hide. He didn't recognize her. No one ever did. To him, she was just another elderly customer. Slow, fragile, confused. Someone he could laugh at. Someone he could ignore. But he had no idea who she really was, or what she carried in that worn-out purse pressed tightly against her chest. The morning sun spilled through the glass windows of the bank, throwing long shadows on the polished floor. Everyone was busy, rushing, checking their phones, waiting for numbers to be called. But the moment she walked in, something shifted. People turned. Some out of curiosity. Some out of impatience. Some because they couldn't understand why a woman her age would be here alone, shuffling step by step, refusing help from anyone. There was something mysterious about her. Something quiet and unspoken. The millionaire, Mr. Dalton, leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen as he watched her approach. He was the kind of man who liked to show off. His expensive suit, his fancy watch, his perfect hair. Everything about him said power and money. He believed the world bent for people like him. And when the old woman reached his desk, he didn't hide the small laugh that escaped him. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right line?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "This counter is for large account holders." The woman lifted her eyes slowly. They were cloudy but calm, as if she had seen far too much to be bothered by his attitude. "I just want to check my balance," she repeated, gently placing her purse on the counter. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze never wavered. He chuckled again, shaking his head as if he was entertaining a pointless conversation. "All right then," he said, still smiling. "Let's take a look. Do you have your account details?" She nodded once and opened her purse. The entire room seemed to pause. There was nothing fancy inside. Just an old leather wallet, a folded piece of paper, and a photograph so faded the edges were curling. She handled them with care, as if each item carried a story no one else could understand. When she finally placed the paper in front of him, his smile weakened just a little. Mr. Dalton typed casually, expecting to confirm a balance of a few dollars at best. But then, his hand stopped. His eyebrows lifted. His smirk vanished. He leaned closer to the screen, blinking fast as if the numbers might change if he stared long enough. "Wait, this can't be right," he muttered. The old woman said nothing. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. Mr. Dalton swallowed hard. His face turned pale. The arrogant laugh he'd been holding on to disappeared completely. He looked up at her slowly, this time not with amusement, but with something closer to fear. And then he whispered, "Ma'am, where did you get this money?" But she didn't answer. She simply smiled. A small, knowing smile that said everything, and revealed nothing. And that was when the doors behind them opened. And everything changed. The bank doors swung open with a soft chime, and a rush of cool air swept through the lobby. For a moment, everyone looked toward the entrance, but no one seemed to recognize the tall man who stepped inside. He moved with quiet purpose, his eyes scanning the room as if he were looking for someone very specific. The old woman didn't turn around, but something in her posture shifted, like she could sense the change in the air. Mr. Dalton noticed it too, and the uneasiness inside him grew heavier. He tried to focus on the computer screen again, but the numbers stayed the same, impossibly high. More zeros than he had ever seen on a personal account. His throat tightened. This woman, this quiet, fragile-looking woman, had more money in her name than he did, than most people in the entire city did. He couldn't understand it. Her clothes were simple. Her shoes were worn. Her hands trembled with age. Nothing about her suggested wealth. And yet the balance in front of him could buy the entire building they were standing in. "Ma'am," he said again, a little more carefully this time, "I need to confirm something. Could you tell me how long you've had this account?" The old woman didn't answer right away. She gently closed her purse and held it against her body, as if she was guarding something precious. Her eyes drifted toward the window, watching the sunlight slide across the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quiet weight. "Longer than you've been alive." Before he could ask more, the tall man from the entrance stepped closer. His footsteps were soft but firm. He pretended to be just another customer waiting his turn, but his gaze never left the woman. Finally, he approached the line and stopped only a few feet away, pretending to look at the brochures. Mr. Dalton noticed him glancing over with too much interest, and his anxiety deepened. "Do you know him?" Dalton whispered, leaning toward the woman. She didn't look at him. She simply shook her head once, her expression unchanged, but the tension in her shoulders became more visible. It was the first sign that she might actually be afraid, or at least cautious. The man moved again, slow and deliberate, as if measuring every step. He paused near the security desk, his eyes flicking between the woman and the computer screen in front of Dalton. The millionaire felt his heartbeat speed up. Something wasn't right. He didn't know if the man was a family member, a stranger, or someone with bad intentions, but the way he watched her made Dalton uneasy in a way he couldn't explain. "Ma'am," Dalton whispered urgently, "if there's something I need to know." She finally turned to him, and for the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. She leaned forward slightly. "Don't say anything out loud," she murmured. "Not yet." Dalton froze. Not yet. What was she hiding? And what danger was she trying to avoid? The tall man suddenly approached the counter, stopping directly behind her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but strangely firm. "I believe she dropped something." The old woman stiffened. Dalton looked down at the floor. There was nothing there. The man smiled slightly. Not friendly, not warm, just knowing. Dalton swallowed hard and glanced at the computer screen again, the massive balance still staring back at him. His mind raced. Who was she? Why was someone watching her? And what did that kind of money mean? Before he could ask, the woman touched his wrist lightly. Her hand shook, but her voice was steady. "Please," she whispered. "Whatever happens next, don't let him near my account." Dalton stared at her, stunned. The room felt tense, as if the air itself was waiting. And then the tall man spoke again, this time with a quiet strength that made the hairs on Dalton's arms rise. "Ma'am, it's time." Mr. Dalton felt the words settle heavily in the air. "Ma'am, it's time." Time for what? His mind spun with questions. The old woman didn't respond right away, but her grip tightened around her purse as if she feared it might be taken from her. She didn't look at the tall man. She kept her eyes on Dalton instead, almost as if she needed him to stay calm for her. The tall man stepped a little closer, but still kept a small, polite distance. "We've been looking for you," he said in a low voice that carried across the quiet lobby. "You shouldn't have come alone." Dalton felt the tension in the air sharpen. The woman finally turned her head just enough to see him from the corner of her eye. Her expression was controlled, but there was something beneath the surface, something like exhaustion mixed with fear. "I told you before," she said quietly. "I handle my own business." The tall man exhaled, an oddly emotional sound for someone who appeared so composed. "Not this time," he replied. "Things have changed." Dalton watched the exchange without understanding a single piece of it, but he could sense the history between them. Something long and complicated. Something heavy enough to weigh down an entire lifetime. And somehow, it all revolved around the money he saw on the screen. Money that no ordinary person could have accumulated by accident. He wondered if she had been wealthy for years and simply lived modestly, or if the money had appeared recently and brought danger along with it. A voice from the back suddenly interrupted the silence. A young teller called out, "Sir, your next client is waiting." But Dalton couldn't move. He felt rooted to the floor, watching events unfold like a story he wasn't supposed to witness. The tall man turned slightly, perhaps to maintain privacy, but his posture remained tense. I'm not leaving, the old woman said softly. Not until I get what I came for. Dalton's curiosity grew. Ma'am, what exactly are you looking for? You already know your balance. She looked at him with eyes that seemed older than her body, older than the building they stood in. I'm not here for the balance, she said slowly. I'm here to see if anything has been taken. Dalton felt his pulse skip. Taken. He glanced at the tall man whose jaw tightened. That's why we need to go, the man said through clenched teeth. This isn't safe. The old woman ignored him and reached into her purse again. This time she pulled out not a paper or photo, but a faded key. It looked old enough to belong to something from a different era. She set it on the counter gently, as if placing a sacred object. Dalton frowned. What's that for? Before she could answer, a woman from across the lobby gasped. Isn't that? She stopped short, covering her mouth. Dalton tried to read her expression, but she quickly turned away as if she had spoken too much already. The tall man shot her a warning look. Dalton's confusion deepened. Something wasn't just unusual about the old woman's account. It was connected to something bigger. Something people didn't dare speak about openly. The old woman leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. Mr. Dalton, there are people who have been searching for this key for a very long time. And they think I don't know why. Dalton's chest tightened. Why would they want it? She gave a tired smile. Because it opens something they were never meant to touch. Before Dalton could ask another question, the tall man's expression shifted sharply. He looked toward the entrance, his eyes narrowing. Too late, he murmured. The doors opened again. 3 men walked in, slow, purposeful, and scanning the room. And the old woman's fingers slowly closed around the key, as if she knew those men weren't here by accident. The moment the 3 men entered, the energy in the bank shifted again, this time colder, heavier, like the whole building was holding its breath. They didn't look around the way normal customers did. Their eyes moved with purpose, each scanning a different section of the room. The tall man beside the elderly woman stiffened, his jaw tightening as though he recognized them instantly. He stepped slightly in front of her, just enough to block their view, but not enough to draw attention. Mr. Dalton felt his palms grow damp. He didn't know what kind of situation he had stepped into, but he could tell it was far beyond anything he was prepared for. He glanced at the computer screen again, the massive balance staring back like a secret he was now unwillingly part of. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just wealth. It was something bigger, older, tied to that faded key now hidden in the old woman's hand. One of the 3 men paused by the entrance and spoke quietly into a small earpiece. Dalton couldn't hear the words, but he saw the tension in his shoulders. The other 2 moved closer to the counters, pretending to look at forms. Pretending but not really pretending. Their eyes kept flicking toward the old woman. The tall man touched her arm gently. We need to go, he whispered. Right now. But she didn't move. She just stood there, breathing slowly, as if she had expected this all along. Not until I know, she murmured. Know what? Dalton asked, voice barely audible. Who accessed my account, she replied. And who has been trying to take what isn't theirs. Dalton swallowed hard. She wasn't just wealthy. She was protecting something. Something people were willing to chase her for. Something valuable enough to risk walking into a busy bank in broad daylight. The tall man leaned closer to her ear. They're not here for the account, he warned. They're here for the key. Her grip tightened around her purse, and Dalton saw a flicker of fear break through her calm for the first time. The man nearest the counter moved another step closer, his eyes locking onto her hand. He tried to hide his interest, but it was clear he had spotted something. Dalton forced himself to think. Security guards were stationed at the front, but they seemed unaware of what was unfolding. The bank lobby continued buzzing quietly, customers going about their business, unaware of the tension stretching across the floor. The old woman suddenly turned to Dalton again. You have the system. I need you to check the transfer logs. Dalton hesitated. Transfer logs. That's restricted. I could lose my job. She met his eyes steadily. You won't lose it if you help me. But you might lose more if you don't. Her words hit harder than he expected. He glanced at the tall man, who nodded once, silently urging him to act. Dalton's hands shook as he typed, navigating through layers of security he wasn't supposed to access. The screen loaded slowly, and with each second, the three men drifted a little closer. Finally, the log appeared. Dalton's eyes widened. Someone tried to move your funds 3 times this week, he whispered. All failed. But the attempt came from inside the bank. Her face darkened with a sadness that seemed almost heavier than fear. I knew it, she said quietly. They've finally found me. Dalton looked up just as one of the men stepped directly toward them. His expression was polite, but his eyes held something sharp. Excuse me, the man said with a forced smile. We're looking for our grandmother. She's a bit confused and tends to wander. Dalton felt a chill crawl up his spine. Grandmother. The tall man stepped forward, blocking their view. She's not your grandmother, he said firmly. The man's smile vanished. The bank grew silent. Dalton's heart pounded. He could feel the climax building like a storm inside the room. The old woman took a single step backward, gripping the key like her life depended on it. The tall man positioned himself defensively in front of her. And then, without warning, the man nearest them reached inside his coat. And everything in the room froze. The man's hand slid inside his coat, and for a split second, everyone in the circle seemed to stop breathing. Even the background hum of the bank faded into silence. But instead of pulling out something harmful, he slowly revealed a folded envelope. Yellowed at the edges. He placed it on the counter between them with a careful, almost ceremonial motion. The tension didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Dalton felt his pulse in his throat. The tall man beside the elderly woman frowned. Where did you get that? The stranger didn't answer. His jaw remained tight, eyes cold, but his hand gently tapped the envelope as if to say open it. The old woman stared at it with a strange expression. Not fear this time. Recognition. Memory. Her lips tightened, and her fingers trembled as she reached out but stopped just short of touching it. That doesn't belong to you, she whispered. The man's voice dropped low. It never belonged to any of us. That's the problem. Dalton blinked in confusion. What is that? What's in it? No one answered him. The old woman finally picked up the envelope, holding it lightly, as if it were fragile. She opened the flap carefully, revealing a set of documents. Dalton noticed the faded ink and the unmistakable shape of old signatures. Contracts, deeds, maybe even ownership records. As she skimmed the papers, a soft gasp escaped her. So they found it, she murmured. The tall man leaned over her shoulder, his face tightening as he scanned the papers. This changes everything. Dalton felt completely lost. Please, he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. Someone needs to tell me what's going on. You said people were trying to access her account. But what is all this? The tall man looked at him with a mixture of caution and urgency. These papers connect her account to something much older than any of us realized. And if these men brought it here, then they're not just following her. Dalton frowned. Then who? The tall man pointed subtly toward the back of the bank. They're following whoever leaked these. Dalton's stomach dropped. Someone inside the bank. Someone with access. Someone who knew about the key and the account. The old woman folded the papers slowly and placed them back inside the envelope. I kept this hidden for decades, she said softly. I never thought I would see them again. The stranger who brought the envelope stepped closer, lowering his voice. We didn't come to hurt you. We came to warn you. That twist hit Dalton like a shockwave. He looked at the other two men. Their stance softened slightly. their eyes no longer predatory but watchful, protective. They weren't hunting her, they were guarding her. The tall man took a step back, stunned. "Then who sent you?" The leader of the three men hesitated, glancing around the lobby as if afraid the walls themselves might be listening. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Someone you trusted. Someone who knows exactly what that key opens." Dalton felt the ground tilt under him. He thought of his co-workers, the managers, the quiet supervisors who worked behind locked doors. Anyone could have accessed the system. Anyone could have tried to move the funds. The old woman's eyes hardened. "Give me a name." The man hesitated. Dalton's heart hammered. He wasn't ready for the answer. The man opened his mouth. But before he could speak, an alarm suddenly blared through the bank. Red lights flashed. Security doors began to slide down automatically. The tall man spun around. "Who triggered that?" The old woman clutched her purse tightly, her voice breaking for the first time. "It's them. They found us." And Dalton realized with a cold jolt, they weren't trapped in the bank with danger outside. Danger was already inside. The blaring alarm echoed through the bank, bouncing off the glass walls and sending customers into a panic. People ducked, whispered, backed away from the counters. Some ran toward the exits, only to find the security shutters already sealed. The old woman stood still in the middle of it all, her eyes focused, not on the chaos, but on the back hallway where a slim shadow appeared behind the tinted glass door. Mr. Dalton felt his breath catch. He recognized that silhouette. The walk, posture, the confidence. It was the branch manager. Not just his boss. The person who had access to everything in the bank. The three men who had delivered the envelope immediately formed a protective circle around the old woman. The tall man stepped forward, tense but steady, his voice low. "I knew it couldn't be anyone from outside. It had to be someone trusted." The branch manager pushed through the door calmly, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves as if he were arriving for a meeting, not walking into a standoff. His expression was calm, too calm. He looked at the old woman, then at the envelope on the counter, then at Dalton. "I warned you," he said softly to her. "You should have stayed hidden." Dalton felt his stomach twist. "Sir, what are you doing?" The manager didn't even look at him. His attention was locked on the woman. That key was supposed to stay buried. And so was the account tied to it. The old woman stepped forward, surprising everyone. Her voice was steady. "You tried to move the funds. And when you failed, you went after the documents." The manager gave a small grin. "Everything needs to come to an end eventually. Even secrets." Dalton felt the weight of the moment. "What do you want?" he asked, though he already knew. The manager's gaze hardened. "The key." The tall man shook his head. "You can't use it. You're not authorized." The manager laughed quietly. "Authorized? I've been preparing for this longer than any of you. I found her because I know what that key unlocks." The old woman held the key gently, the metal worn smooth from decades of protecting it. "You think it opens money," she said softly. "But it opens something far more dangerous." Dalton felt chilled. He didn't know what she meant, but the fear in her voice was real. The manager took a single step forward. The security guards hesitated, unsure who to follow. The tension snapped tight like a wire ready to break. But the old woman surprised everyone. She placed the key on the counter, not giving it away, not surrendering, just placing it down. The manager's eyes widened. He lunged forward to grab it. But before his fingers touched the metal, the tall man slammed his hand down, trapping the manager's fingers painfully against the counter. A sharp cry escaped him. The three protective men moved instantly, pinning him in place with swift, controlled force. The old woman stepped close, lifting her chin. "You should have remembered who I am," she said quietly. "I'm not just a name on an account." Dalton watched in shock as the manager struggled uselessly. She turned to Dalton. "Pull up the original ownership file." His hands trembled as he typed, but the screen displayed it within seconds. And there it was. The old woman's name. Not as a beneficiary. Not as a mysterious client. But as the founder. Dalton gasped. You built the trust. This entire fund. It's yours. She nodded gently. I created it to protect something for the next generation. Not to be stolen by greedy hands. The manager stopped struggling. The truth had crushed him. The three men released him just as security rushed over, responding to the alarm. The manager tried to speak, tried to twist the story, but the evidence was already on the screen. Everything he had done traced back to him. As he was escorted away, the old woman turned to Dalton with a tired smile. Thank you. You did more than you know. Dalton could barely speak. What happens now? What about the key? The tall man picked it up gently and placed it back into her hand. It stays with her. Where it belongs. The woman nodded and slipped it back into her purse, her eyes soft but thoughtful. The money was never the real secret, she said quietly. It was what the key protects. Dalton hesitated. What does it protect? She gave a small smile, one that held years of history behind it. Not money, she said. Legacy. Dalton exhaled in relief, until he noticed something on the computer screen the system automatically pulled up. Another transaction attempt. Timestamp. 2 minutes ago. Location remote access. Dalton froze. Ma'am. Someone else is trying again. She closed her eyes, exhaling softly, as if the twist didn't surprise her at all. It seems, she whispered, our story isn't over yet. Dalton stared at the computer screen, the blinking alert reflecting in his eyes. For a moment, it felt like the room had stopped moving again, the noise of customers returning to normal barely reaching him. The old woman walked slowly to the counter, steadying herself with one hand as she leaned in to look at the display. Her jaw tightened, but there was no panic, only a quiet, worn-out acceptance, like someone who had lived through storms far worse than this one. The tall man stepped close to her. It's another attempt. But it didn't go through, he said calmly. They don't have the key or the documents. They can't complete it. Dalton glanced between them. But they're still trying. Doesn't that mean someone else knows? The old woman nodded, her voice soft but clear. Yes, someone far away. Someone who thought I wouldn't dare show my face in public. Coming here forced them to reveal themselves. She gave a small, almost knowing smile. Sometimes you have to walk into the light so the shadows stop hiding. Dalton didn't fully understand her logic, but he could sense the weight of her words. This wasn't just about wealth or money, it was about freedom, control, responsibility. The kind of legacy she had carried for 90 long years. The three protective men gathered closer, speaking quietly among themselves. Dalton could catch pieces. Plans to update security protocols, notify a legal team, freeze certain access routes. They moved with the discipline of people who had been doing this for a very long time. Not bodyguards. Not hired muscle. Something deeper, like family bound by honor instead of blood. The old woman turned to Dalton and placed her hand gently over his. Young man, she said, you did what was right today, even when you were afraid. That matters more than you know. Dalton felt something in his chest loosen, the knot of stress finally easing. I didn't want anything bad to happen to you. Her eyes softened. Bad things happen when good people stay silent. You didn't stay silent. The bank's security shutters began to lift again, allowing daylight to spill back into the lobby. The alarm was silenced. Customers cautiously returned to their lines, whispering about what they thought happened, though none of them knew the real story. The branch manager was already being led away by higher-level security officers and investigators. His betrayal would be documented, audited, and handled far above Dalton's pay grade. The tall man approached him again. We'll take it from here, he said. But we'll need copies of the logs and the flagged access attempts. Dalton nodded and printed everything out, handing the stack of papers carefully to him. The old woman watched with a quiet, thoughtful expression, like she was finally seeing a long battle inch toward its end. Before she turned to leave, she took Dalton's hand again. "You asked earlier what the key protects," she said. "It protects what money can't buy. History, dignity, and the future of people who will never even know my name. That's why I've kept it safe for so long." Dalton swallowed, feeling the truth in her words. Will they ever stop trying? She gave a gentle shrug. Greed never sleeps. But neither does courage. The tall man guided her toward the exit as the automatic doors opened again. She paused just long enough to look back at Dalton with a grateful smile. "Take care of yourself," she said softly. "And don't underestimate the difference one honest person can make." Dalton nodded, watching as she and her guardian stepped into the sunlight outside, moving with a slow but sure confidence. He realized then that he had witnessed something far bigger than a bank account check or a security breach. He had witnessed a chapter of someone's life, a long, hidden chapter, finally closing. The computer screen dimmed, the alert disappearing. Customers returned. The bank returned to its normal rhythm. But Dalton didn't. He stood a moment longer, absorbing everything that had happened, and everything that almost had. And as he finally stepped back into his routine, he carried with him a quiet truth, that sometimes the smallest actions can shape the biggest stories, and sometimes the most ordinary moments reveal the most extraordinary people. The story had ended, but the lesson stayed with him.